Hi everyone. Today I want to talk about hate speech on social media. In particular, how Facebook enabled the spread of hate speech against Rohingya people in Myanmar and how this directly contributed to ethnic cleansing and genocide. I should be clear, first of all, that Facebook is not uniquely culpable among social media companies when it comes to failing to tackle hate speech. Rather, I want to talk about this specific human tragedy because it is a particularly severe example of the wider issue of social media companies failing to deal with hate speech on their platforms. Before we look at the specifics of what happened in Myanmar, I think it is important to answer some basic questions. What is hate speech? And does tackling hate speech risk damaging freedom of speech? The first thing to be aware of with hate speech is that the legal definition of it varies between countries, with some nations, such as the United States of America, not having specific hate speech legislation at all. In non-legal terms, hate speech is speech which attacks a person or group of people on the basis of the attributes of that group. For example, on the basis of gender, race, religion, or sexuality. Before we continue, I want to quickly contrast how hate speech is handled by the legal systems of two countries, the United States and Germany. I also should add that Three Arrows recently produced an excellent video looking at several of the issues that I'm about to cover, as well as the wider context, again comparing the United States and Germany. Link is in the description. First, let us look at the United States. Unlike most other liberal democracies, the United States does not regulate hate speech, with the Supreme Court repeatedly ruling that hate speech is legally protected free speech under the First Amendment to the Constitution. The landmark ruling in this area is the ruling in Brandenburg v. Ohio, 1969. In this case, a Ku Klux Klan leader named Clarence Brandenburg was charged with advocating violence after being filmed at a KKK rally advocating for revengeance against N-words and Jews. The Supreme Court held that since this speech did not constitute imminent lawless action, the government could not constitutionally punish it. The Supreme Court set out the following test for judging whether speech constitutes seditious speech under the First Amendment. The constitutional guarantees of the free speech and free press do not permit a state to forbid or prescribe advocacy of the use of force or of law violation, except where such advocacy is directed to inciting or producing imminent lawless action and is likely to incite or produce such action. This imminent lawless action test remains the basis for when speech may be restricted or punished by the government in the United States. By way of contrast, let us briefly turn to Germany. Germany is well known for having some of the strongest hate speech legislation in the world, and has been at the forefront of attempts to apply hate speech legislation to social media. In Germany, it is an offence to incite hatred against a national, racial, or religious group, or a group defined by their ethnic origins. Someone who is convicted of such an offence can be punished by imprisonment. This strong stance against hate speech, by limiting what is an acceptable form of public speech, lies at the opposite end of the spectrum to the United States and provides us with a completely different model for how we can approach hate speech. You may wonder why I've just spent a couple of minutes talking about slightly arcane seeming legal definitions. My reason for doing so is that they highlight the basis for almost all opposition to measures designed to tackle hate speech, that they will infringe on the right to freedom of speech. So, does tackling hate speech run contrary to allowing freedom of speech? And the answer is technically yes. But this is the wrong question to ask. Freedom of speech is already restricted, including in the United States, for reasons that most people would consider entirely legitimate. For example, those who have access to classified information, which is important for national security, may not use their freedom of speech by talking about that information in public, and many governments, again, including the United States government, have restricted the freedom of the press in wartime, citing national security concerns. This leads us to a wider point. There are many occasions where it is not just necessary, but entirely legitimate to restrict a given human right because it conflicts with another human right which takes priority. When epidemics of serious diseases break out, certain human rights of those at the epicenter of the outbreak are suspended in order to allow for effective quarantining of the disease. This is justified by the threat to the rights to life and to health of others if the quarantine is not enforced. Similarly, in the examples related to national security I gave previously, the restriction of an individual's right to freedom of speech is justified by the threat to the right to life of others if that individual exercises their freedom of speech. Furthermore, the restriction of hate speech is actually enshrined in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights adopted by the United Nations General Assembly in 1966. Article 20(2) states that any advocacy of national, racial or religious hatred that constitutes incitement to discrimination, hostility or violence shall be prohibited by law. It is worth noting that the United States has never accepted the full implementation of the Covenant, in large part because of this article. And this brings us back to hate speech and to Myanmar. Myanmar, in Southeast Asia, is a primarily Buddhist country. However, a sizable community of Rohingya people, a Muslim minority group, have historically lived in Rakhine State on the west coast of Myanmar. The Rohingya have historically suffered severe persecution from Myanmar and its military. They are denied citizenship, they are banned from travelling without official permission, and they've been subjected to routine forced labour and harassment by the security forces. In October 2016, there were attacks on several border police posts in Rakhine State, which were attributed to a Muslim insurgent group. In response, the Myanmar military commenced a brutal crackdown in northern Rakhine State. Hundreds of Rohingya were killed, with arbitrary arrests, extrajudicial killings, gang rape and looting widespread. By January 2017, it was estimated that almost 100,000 Rohingya, out of an initial population of approximately 1 million, had been displaced by the violence. This was only the beginning of the genocide of the Rohingya. Over the course of 2017 and 2018, the Myanmar military and local Buddhist extremists committed atrocity after atrocity against the Rohingya people. By December 2017, the charity Médecins Sans Frontières estimated that over 10,000 Rohingya had been killed. According to the United Nations, by September 2018, over 700,000 Rohingya had fled Rakhine State, almost all of them to Bangladesh. But these numbers cannot begin to encapsulate the nature of the crimes against humanity which were inflicted upon the Rohingya. A UN report describes women and girls being taken into rooms where their jewellery and money was taken from them. They were beaten, brutally raped, and frequently stabbed. Children or infants who were in the room with them were also killed or severely injured, often by stabbing. The houses were then locked and set on fire. The report concludes that the actions of the Myanmar military undoubtedly amounted to the gravest crimes under international law. It finds that, quote, "The crimes in Rakhine State and the manner in which they were perpetrated are similar in nature, gravity and scope to those that have allowed genocidal intent to be established in other contexts." Unquote. Finally, it states, quote, "There is sufficient information to warrant the investigation and prosecution of senior officials in the Tatmadaw, the Myanmar military, chain of command, so that a competent court can determine their liability for genocide in relation to the situation in Rakhine State." Unquote. In summary, the military of Myanmar, along with local extremists, committed genocide against the Rohingya. But you may be wondering, where does Facebook come into this? To answer that, I shall turn first to an investigation carried out by the news agency Reuters. In August 2018, Reuters published the shocking results of an investigation titled "Why Facebook is Losing the War on Hate Speech in Myanmar." The investigation is linked in the description, as are other sources I have used, including the United Nations report. The report by Reuters presents a sample of some of the material posted about the Rohingya on Facebook, all of which was still viewable and had not been taken down at the time of the Reuters report being published. One user posted a restaurant advertisement featuring Rohingya-style food. "We must fight them the way Hitler did the Jews, damn Kalars," the person wrote, using a pejorative term for the Rohingya. That post went up in December 2013. Another post showed a news article from an army-controlled publication about attacks on police stations by Rohingya militants. "These non-human Kalar dogs, the Bengalis, are killing and destroying our land, our water and our ethnic people," the user wrote. "We need to destroy their race." That post went up last September as the violence against the Rohingya peaked. These posts were among more than 1,000 collected by Reuters, all of which were still on Facebook as of a week before the report was published. Some of the material had been on Facebook for as long as 6 years, and almost all of it was in the local language Burmese, and this fact will be important later. First of all, let's be clear. Regardless of the legality of any of this material, it all contravened Facebook's terms of service, which specifically prohibit attacking ethnic groups with violent or dehumanizing speech or comparing them to animals. So why did this content remain visible on Facebook? The answer takes us to the very core of Facebook's broken content moderation system. At this point, I should once again emphasize, Facebook is not unique in this regard. Other websites like Twitter and Reddit have failed on this front too. But Facebook's failings have, in this case, had the most serious of consequences. Back to the topic. How does Facebook detect objectionable content? There are two main methods: algorithms which scan for content which may break Facebook's rules, and users reporting content that they encounter. Unfortunately, the genocide of the Rohingya demonstrated how both these methods can fail. Firstly, algorithms. Algorithmic moderation has long been used by tech companies as an excuse to not moderate their platforms properly. After all, why hire thousands of humans if algorithms can do the job equally well? Unfortunately, these algorithms can't do the job equally well. In many cases, they can't do the job at all. Reuters reports that, to this day, Facebook relies heavily upon users in Myanmar reporting hate speech and other objectionable content because Facebook systems struggle to read Burmese text. This meant that Facebook had to fall back on its other method for moderating content, reviewing problematic posts flagged by users. With that in mind, take a guess how many Burmese speakers Facebook had reviewing problematic posts in early 2015. Alright, Major guess? Well, the correct answer is 2. Just 2 people who could speak Burmese were reviewing posts. This dereliction of duty is even more shocking given that Facebook was warned about the danger of hate speech against the Rohingya people on its platform as far back as 2013. That year, Australian documentary filmmaker Ayla Kalam met with Elliot Schrager, Vice President of Communications and Public Policy at Facebook, and warned him about hate speech against the Rohingya on Facebook. According to Kalam, Schrager failed to connect her with anyone inside Facebook who could deal with the issue. In 2015, David Madden, a tech entrepreneur from Myanmar, gave a talk at Facebook's headquarters in which he told the audience that Facebook was being exploited to incite hatred in Myanmar, and yet nothing was done. This complete apathy was coupled with a content review system that made effective policing of Facebook's platform impossible. Even when Facebook did eventually hire more Burmese-speaking content reviewers, each individual would have to make judgments on 1,000 or more pieces of content a day. These reviewers, who would often only have a few seconds to judge whether the piece of content should be removed, did not and could not proactively moderate the platform. Instead, they simply reviewed a queue of posts reported by Facebook users. Furthermore, not all of these reviewers spoke Burmese, and so they had to rely on Facebook's translation software, which often made effective reviewing of content impossible. As one example, a post which in Burmese said, "Kill all the Kalars that you see in Myanmar, none of them should be left alive," was translated into English as, "I shouldn't have a rainbow in Myanmar." Facebook's contribution to the genocide in Myanmar was highlighted in the United Nations report I mentioned earlier. To quote the report, "The mission has no doubt that the prevalence of hate speech in Myanmar significantly contributed to increased tension and a climate in which individuals and groups may become more receptive to incitement and calls for violence. This also applies to hate speech on Facebook." In its conclusions, the United Nations made a series of recommendations regarding Facebook and other social media platforms. You can find the full list of those recommendations in the United Nations report in the description. In particular, the United Nations recommended that all social media platforms active in Myanmar, including messenger systems, should apply international human rights law as the basis for content moderation on their platforms. Facebook and other social media platforms, including messenger systems, should allow for an independent and thorough examination of the use of their platforms to spread messages inciting to violence and discrimination in Myanmar. The extent to which posts and messages on its platform have led to real-world discrimination and violence should be a part of such examination. Their experience in Myanmar should be examined as a situation of great concern in itself and as a case study for their global operations. All social media platforms active in Myanmar, including messenger systems, should enhance their capacity to combat the use of their platforms for the spread and promotion of threats and the incitement to violence, hostility and discrimination. This includes hiring sufficient content moderators who are familiar with the context, background and nuances of Myanmar language and the issue of hate speech in the country, and providing them with training on human rights standards. And finally, before entering any new market, particularly those with volatile ethnic, religious or other social tensions, Facebook and other social media platforms, including messenger systems, should conduct in-depth human rights impact assessments for their products, policies and operations based on the national context and take mitigating measures to reduce risks as much as possible. In other words, Facebook and other social media platforms must police their platforms properly, and they can only do this by accepting the need to hire more humans to review the content posted on their platforms. Up until now, social media companies have done the bare minimum to police their platforms. But this cannot be allowed to continue. What has happened in Myanmar has shown the world that it is essential that these companies tackle the issue of hate speech. That means accepting that the dream of platforms policed by algorithms is exactly that, a dream. Social media companies must accept the responsibility of hiring and training enough skilled moderators to properly review the material being shared on their platforms, or they must be compelled to do so. And this is not a crackdown on free speech. Removing hate speech from online platforms is not the start of a slippery slope towards an Orwellian nightmare. The dystopia does not come from properly policing hate speech on social media. The dystopia comes from letting it run unchecked, from fueling the fire's bigotry and prejudice. Hate speech on social media is not new. Myanmar is not the only place Facebook has turned a blind eye to hatred and violence on its platform. We see hate speech on social media every day in every country, towards Muslims, towards Jews, towards ethnic minorities, towards LGBT people. But what Myanmar is a warning about what can happen if we don't deal with hate speech. Facebook has the blood of the Rohingya people on its hands, if not literally then morally, due to their inaction and their refusal to properly police their platform. If nothing changes, how long before those hands are covered in the blood of millions more? Thank you to everyone for watching. I'm hoping to release more videos in the fairly near future, so please do check those out when they come up. If you've got any thoughts, or if you've been in any way impacted by what I've just talked about, please do leave a comment. I'd be very happy to reply to you and discuss with you any thoughts you have on this at all. Thank you once again for checking out the video, and have a good day.